Sogi Chonam La Jam Chu Bardu Tani Kapsuchi Nagi Jinsogi Be Salam Ki Chola Benchir Sange Druparsho Nutong Sogi Chonam La Chanchu Bardu Dani Kapsuchi Dagi Jinsogi Be Salam Ki Drola Benchir Sange Druparsho Chetong Sogi Cholam La Chanchu Bardu Dani Kapsuchi Dagi Jinsogi Be Salam Ki Chola Benchir Sange Druparsho Damche Dewa Dong Dewe Gyutong Tenpa Yuchi Danya Dong Dunya Gi Gyutong Dewa Yuchi Danya Mepe Dewa Tongpa Tong Mindawa Yuchi Ning Cha Tong Tong Dewe Tong Nyam Champola Nepar Gyuchi Sawe Lama Rinpoché Dagi Chi Urbe Meden Shula Gadrin Champa Kone Jesum De Kusum Tuki Nyadra Satu Sa Shunane Champel Yang La Cha Salo Gongi Lo Jinye Chindani Ta Nam Darab Sawe Jinye De Kun Zi Chin Zi Chir Niki Tu Kale Bam Zin Ganda Si Pe Tsunan Mari Monton Dunya Hisewe Nutso Kula Buchik Tatse Yenla Chuchu Yondensen Dutar Chuton Yumon Nilo Leki Chandra Dunze Ching Mare Munsel Tinyan Yuko Chunye Chunzera Shinam Nene Tachun Sarchun Tarsun Yanden Lanzo Kyanse Tuwaku Chunta Chutong Chunyi Genche Dangu Munsa Chambe Yong La Du Seden Kuki Kanama Zagi Tangle Timu Munparab Sane Kantang Shinsho Jun Lopayu Lulu Pobe Nawa Santu Su Hello everyone. We will continue the presentation of the Abhidharmakosha. Just to remind you of the outline of the text and its structure, the Abhidharmakosha is a text composed by Vasubandhu in the 4th century. Concerning the purpose of this text, Khelzang Puntso told us, Khelzang Puntso is the Acharya who taught this text to us. He said, one who wishes permanent happiness, one who wishes to attain liberation and omniscience, must absolutely know two things: what is to be adopted and what is to be rejected. What is to be adopted are phenomena dissociated from factors for descent. In other words, the truth of the path. And the result of the path. In other words, liberation and omniscience. That is what is to be adopted, and what is to be rejected are phenomena associated with factors for descent. This is all phenomena linked with samsara. These 2 points, what is to be adopted and what is to be rejected, are what is covered in this text over the course of 8 chapters. The first 2 chapters are entitled The Presentation of the Dhatus. We've already presented the first chapter. The second chapter that we are currently presenting is called The Presentation of the Governing Faculties. And these first 2 chapters are a general presentation of phenomena associated and dissociated with and from factors for descent. Then, starting from chapter 3, each chapter specifically concerns either phenomena associated with factors for descent or phenomena dissociated from factors for descent. Chapter 3 is the presentation of the world. It is a presentation of the world and beings. Which is, in fact, a presentation of the truth of suffering. And then, in chapters 4 and 5, which are respectively entitled Presentation of the Acts and Presentation of Afflictions, these 2 chapters cover the truth of the origin of suffering. Through chapters 3, 4, and 5, which we've just explained, by way of the presentation of the world and its causes, actions, and afflictions, we study the aspect that is associated with factors for descent. It is a detailed presentation of phenomena associated with factors for descent. In other words, what is to be rejected. The last 3 chapters, chapters 6, 7, and 8, cover in detail phenomena dissociated from factors for descent. What is to be adopted? The truth of the path and of cessation. Chapter 6 is the presentation of paths and individuals. This chapter covers the truth of the path. Chapter 7 is the presentation of wisdom. Here, Khelzang Puntso said there's no particular chapter dedicated to the truth of cessation. The explanations on the truth of cessation are found sprinkled throughout chapter 6 and 7. And last, the 8th chapter is the presentation of the meditative absorptions. In order to actualize primordial wisdom, it's necessary to have a support. This support is meditative absorptions. So that was a brief introduction to the 8 chapters of the text. And we continue. Hello. So you can look at your outline. If anyone's listening in English, it's coming soon. If you have the outline at hand, prior to the 8 chapters, there is a preliminary section of the text, which corresponds to the first stanza. We also covered chapter 1, which is the presentation of the dhatus. Therefore, we are currently focusing on chapter 2, the presentation of the faculties. This chapter 2 on the faculties is divided into 2 parts. First, the presentation of the chapter's reference text, and later a presentation of the name of the chapter. We are looking at the first section, the presentation of the reference text, which itself is made up of 3 subsections. First, we covered the nature of governing faculty. We've concluded that. Now we're looking at the second subsection, the mode of birth of conditioned phenomena. And following this, there will be a third section, the explanation of causes, conditions, and fruits. The mode of birth of conditioned phenomena, the section we're currently focusing on, has 2 sections. We've covered the mode of birth of material phenomena, and we are looking at the mode of birth of immaterial phenomena. The mode of birth of immaterial phenomena has 2 sections, a concise presentation and a detailed explanation. We have come to the detailed explanation, which once again has 2 subsections. First, the detailed explanation of phenomena associated by similarity with mind. We'll come back to this. And then the detailed explanation of conditioning phenomena non-associated by similarity with mind. So currently we're still looking at phenomena that are associated by similarity with mind, which has various parts. We're looking at the detailed explanation. This detailed explanation includes 4 subsections. Last session, we concluded the first subsection, which was the classification of the 5 great bases. And then we'll also see which mental events are present around which sovereign minds. Next subsection is the differences between mental events that resemble each other. And this will conclude this section on phenomena associated by similarity with mind. Last time we went over the classification of the 5 great bases. We will just quickly review them. First, we looked at the great basis for all sovereign minds. Then the great basis for virtuous sovereign mind. And then there is the great basis for non-virtuous sovereign mind, then the great basis for afflicted sovereign mind, then the great basis for minorly afflicted sovereign mind, or afflicted mind, sovereign mind of minor afflictions. So we covered these 5. which correspond to a group of mental events in each case that accompany a particular type of sovereign mind. There was a commentary given, and Khelzang Puntso explained. He came back to, or summed up, these 5 great bases. We left off there. Then, following this, Khelzang Puntso talks about these 5 great bases, which are determined associations in the sense that the mental events of these bases are associated with one type of sovereign mind. We looked at these. Now we'll look at a 6th group, which is called the group of 8 undetermined mental events, or the 8 undetermined. Which of course also connects to the fact that those that are undetermined are not associated with a particular type of sovereign mind. The 8 undetermined are the following. First, coarse examination. Second, subtle analysis. Third, regret. Fourth, sleep. Fifth, pride. Sixth, aversion. Seventh, desire, attachment. And the 8th and final one, doubt. You may have noticed that these 8 are not presented in the root text itself. These are additions that Khelzang Puntso gave in his commentary. Here, Khelzang Puntso specifies or continues his explanation of what this category of the group of undetermined mental events is. It's named in this way because it doesn't accompany a specific type of sovereign mind in general, as was the case for those in the great bases. For example, he says the 8 undetermined do not accompany all virtuous sovereign mind, nor all non-virtuous sovereign mind, nor all afflicted sovereign mind, nor all sovereign mind of minor afflictions. This is why these 8 mental events are considered to be undetermined. Everything all right till now? Okay. If we look at this more precisely, how is it, or in what way do these 8 undetermined not accompany, for example, the sovereign mind of minor afflictions? We saw that concerning this group of mental events in mind, they need to fulfill 3 conditions. I'll just state them and then we'll go into it in detail after. There is the condition of association, the condition of the class of things to abandon, and the condition of support. So this concerns conditions for a mental event being part of the group related to minor affliction. And then we'll look at how these 8 undetermined don't fulfill these criteria and are not part of this category of sovereign mind of minor afflictions. The first is condition of association, which means that the conditions of were not fulfilled. And so the condition of association concerns the fact that the afflictive obscurations, minor afflictive obscurations, are not associated with ignorance. And the 8 undetermined mental events don't fulfill this criteria. The second condition is the condition of the class of things to abandon, which corresponds to the fact that minor afflictions are only abandoned by the path of meditation among the 5 classes of things to abandon. Once again, this is not the case for the 8 undetermined. They don't fulfill these criteria. And lastly, that the condition of support, which is that the consciousness associated with minor afflictions does not rely on mental faculty out of these 6 faculties. This is another criteria that the 8 undetermined do not correspond to. Minor afflictive obscurations, in terms of the consciousness that is associated with them, sovereign mind associated with them, only relies on mental faculty out of the 6 faculties. In other words, these minor afflictions are only associated with mental consciousness. We looked at these 3 conditions during our last session. The 8 undetermined mental events don't fulfill these conditions. And more generally, the group of 8 undetermined mental events does not fulfill the conditions to be a part of any of the 5 great bases. Neither the great basis of all sovereign mind, nor the great basis of virtuous sovereign mind, nor the great basis of non-virtuous sovereign mind, nor the great basis of afflicted sovereign mind, nor the great basis of sovereign mind of minor afflictions. To put it another way, sometimes each of these 8 is present, sometimes not. There's not something determined. Due to this, they are considered to be unassociated in terms of their function. Concerning the 8 undetermined mental events, we'll first look at the first 4. Khelzang Puntso will explain them to a certain extent. So again, these first 4 are coarse examination, subtle analysis, regret, and sleep. We'll look at these 4 to start. Why these 4? Because they are the 4 undetermined mental events that the Khelzang talks about. Maybe this rings a bell for you. It's possible that the translation is slightly different. The translation could have been variable rather than undetermined, but in any case, these 4 are mentioned. Khelzang Puntso says, coarse examination in and of itself is not virtuous, nor non-virtuous, nor undefined. none of these three in and of themselves. However, once associated with virtuous sovereign mind, then course examination, for example, becomes virtuous. The same goes for when it is associated with non-virtuous sovereign mind. Course examination becomes non-virtuous. And when it is associated with an undefined mental event, it becomes undefined. This is also the case for subtle analysis. Khelzang Puntso told us, like course examination, subtle analysis takes on the characteristics of the consciousness that they are associated with. Therefore, it then becomes virtuous, non-virtuous, or still undefined. So that covers course examination and subtle analysis. Then Khelzang Puntso goes on, saying, concerning regret, it's somewhat different, because regret is an undetermined mental event that can only be virtuous or non-virtuous. It cannot be undefined. Undefined regret does not exist. When regret is associated with virtuous sovereign mind, it becomes virtuous. If it is associated with a non-virtuous sovereign mind, then regret is non-virtuous. Concerning the four that we named, we've covered three. Now we come to sleep. Khelzang Puntso asked the question, do you know the exact meaning of sleep? Because the meaning here is somewhat specific. Here, Khelzang Puntso explains that in the beginning, when he heard that sleep is a mental event, he was very surprised. Because he thought that sleeping is just falling asleep, being asleep, as many of us may think, having our eyes closed and sleeping. But this is not what's at hand here. Sleep, in this case, is a mental event which corresponds to great fatigue, which allows for resting. To share, it seems like the point here isn't just talking about sleep, but it's that there's really a mental event at hand, which is being greatly tired and which leads to taking rest. When this mental event is active, the five sense consciousnesses are enclosed within the sixth consciousness, mental consciousness. When sleep is active, then the five sense consciousnesses are inactive. They are enclosed within the mental consciousness. So that covers these four, which can also be found in the Kichuk: course examination, subtle analysis, regret, and sleep. Now that we have evoked the 8 undetermined mental events and clarified somewhat the first 4, we have covered all of the 46 mental events covered in the Abhidharmakosha. In other words, first, well, let's go over them quickly. So the first great basis is 10 mental events that accompany all sovereign minds. Then second great basis is also made up of 10 mental events which accompany all virtuous sovereign mind. And that brings us to 20. Third great basis concerns 6 mental events that accompany all afflicted sovereign minds. Afflicted or associated with afflictive obscurations, depending on the translation. So these 6 bring us to 26. Then the fourth great basis is made up of 2 mental events that accompany all non-virtuous sovereign minds. This brings us to 28. And then the fifth great basis is also made up of 10 mental events which accompany all sovereign minds of affliction, of minor affliction. That brings us to 38. And if we add the 8 undetermined mental events that we just looked at, this brings us to 46 mental events. "46 mental events for the Abhidharmakosha, and just for reference, there are 51 in the Khelzang. So what are the 5 that are mentioned in the Khelzang? They are absence of ignorance, absence of vigilance, view, distraction, and forgetting. The Vaibhashika did not include these 5 mental events: absence of ignorance, absence of vigilance, view, distraction, and forgetting in their classifications. Now we'll look at why. Concerning the first 3, absence of ignorance, absence of vigilance, and view, for the Vaibhashika, these 3 are part of discernment. Discernment is already included in the great basis of sovereign mind, of all sovereign mind. Next, distraction. Distraction is soiled concentration, stained concentration. It is concentration that is associated with the afflictions. It is nevertheless concentration, so it is included in the mental event of concentration, which is part of the first group, which is part of the great basis of all sovereign mind. And then lastly, forgetting. Forgetting is remembrance associated with afflictive obscurations. This forgetting is part of the mental event of forgetting, which a part of the great basis of all sovereign mind. As these 5 were already part of the great basis of all sovereign mind, they were not taught again. This makes 46 rather than 51 mental events taught by the Vaibhashika here. Now we've covered the subject of sovereign mind and mental events in detail. In other texts, it's not as clear as it is in the Abhidharmakosha. The question we might ask ourselves is, why did the Buddha teach about mental events? There are two reasons for this. The first aspect, the first reason, is that on the path we need to abandon afflictions and cultivate virtue. Whereas for abandoning afflictions, it is necessary to know them. If we do not know the afflictions, we cannot abandon them. And the same is true for virtue. Virtue is to be cultivated, but if we don't recognize virtue, we won't be able to cultivate it. This is why, in order to practice virtue, it's necessary to know all of these mental events. Khelzang Puntso gave an example. We can consider a paid assassin. Before killing someone, the assassin needs to have a photo of their target. The idea is the same here. We first need to know what we intend to eliminate. It's logical. And there are several afflictions, kleshas, like pride or desire, that are very difficult to understand because we credit them with positive qualities. However, in this text, it's explained very clearly what is favorable and unfavorable. And based on this knowledge, then we'll be able to leave behind unfavorable factors. And at this point, we'll be able to say that we are Dharma practitioners. Khelzang Puntso repeats that it's difficult to be clear about all these different mental events. He then gives an example of something that happened to him. He says that he had carried out a positive action. He was saving insects. And then he says somebody saw him, and then he had the thought, oh, they must think I'm a good person. And then he said, if we really reflect on this, this feeling of satisfaction that we experience due to being seen is nothing but pride. When Khelzang Puntso knew that such mental events, like pride, are not favorable, then naturally he tried to give up nurturing them in this process with the afflictions. Then he gives another example, an example from Gampopa's work, life. When Gampopa went to meet Milarepa, Milarepa knew that Gampopa would be arriving. Therefore, he asked someone from his retinue to go and find Gampopa, because he knew that Gampopa would be his main disciple. And he told the person, if you go get him, then you won't be reborn in the hell realms. At this point in time, Gampopa was very sick close to death, a woman went to meet him. And she had heard what Milarepa said and repeated it to him. Hearing this, Gampopa experienced pridefulness. Milarepa, knowing this, then let him wait for 15 days before receiving him. When we know everything that is said in this text, we know what is to be adopted and what is to be rejected when mental events arise. That was the first aspect, why it's important to know the mental events, why the Buddha taught them. The first point is knowing them so that we can adopt or reject them. Knowing the mental events is important in order to cultivate virtue and give up non-virtue. The second reason is that it's important to know mental events in order to remedy the belief in a self. The second reason why the mental events were presented is that most people believe that consciousness and the mental events are a self. If the Buddha had directly told them that there was no self, there is no self, it wouldn't have been a good start. Therefore, the Buddha used another, better method. He laid out everything concerning consciousnesses and mental events. When we know the mental events, 46 in the kosha or 51 in the kechuk, when we know them, we can't really think that there is a self. A person cannot accept or hold that they are one of these 51 mental events. The main point of the Buddhist teaching is that all beings is for all beings to abandon belief in a self. If the Buddha directly said that there was no self, there is no self, no one would have believed him. So he took time to explain it, and the method yielded its fruit. So that concludes the explanations of the first main point, the 5 great bases. The first main point that make up, of the points that make up phenomena associated by similarity with mind. Now we come to the second point of this detailed explanation, which is entitled, Which Mental Events Are Present Around Which Sovereign Mind? And there will be 2 parts, as you can see in your outline. The first is which mental events are present around a sovereign mind of the desire realm, and second point, which mental events are present in the higher realms. Now we'll see how many mental events are present around the various sovereign minds. For our study here, we'll focus on two aspects. First, we'll focus on sovereign mind of the desire realm, and then we'll look at sovereign mind of the two higher realms, the form and the formless realm. To begin, which mental events are present around a sovereign mind of the desire realm? There are 4 subsections to this. The mental events around a virtuous sovereign mind, then around a non-virtuous sovereign mind, then around an undefined sovereign mind. That's 3. And the 4th point is clarification concerning sleep. If we named this clarification about sleep, then in this first section, there will be 4 cases. The first aspect, when it is virtuous. Second, non-virtuous. For the third part, there are... So the third part is undefined, hindering liberation, or which acts as an obstacle to liberation. And the other case related to this is undefined, not hindering liberation. We can begin with mental events around virtuous sovereign mind. There are 2 subsections here. First, a general case, and then a particular case. We are considering the desire realm. We are considering a virtuous sovereign mind of the desire realm. So in this case, we are focusing on the desire realm, and we're looking at a virtuous sovereign mind. The question here is, how many mental events are there around this sovereign mind? So in this case, we'll first look at the general case. We find this in stanza 28, lines 2, 3, and 4. In the desire realm, due to the presence of coarse examination and subtle analysis, there are 22 mental events. This stanza tells us that in the desire realm, around a virtuous sovereign mind, in general, there are 22 mental events. We can easily list them. As it is the sovereign mind, there's necessarily the first great basis that accompanies all sovereign mind. So around this sovereign mind, this virtuous sovereign mind of the desire realm, we find the group of 10 mental events that accompany all sovereign mind. Then, as this sovereign mind is virtuous, necessarily we find the great basis of all virtuous sovereign minds around this sovereign mind. In other words, 10 additional mental events. We're not going to list the mental events at hand here each time. We went over them in detail last session, but you can look over your notes if you need a refresher. So that brings us to 20, 10 plus 10. Then, as we're in the desire realm, coarse examination and subtle analysis are always present around a sovereign mind. We can add them as well. This brings us to a total of 22 mental events around a virtuous sovereign mind of the desire realm. There's a question, but we can ask questions at the end of the session. So that concerned the general case. Now we come to the particular case. In the desire realm, around a virtuous sovereign mind, the root text continues in the first line of stanza 29. In certain cases, it's necessary to add regret. As we saw in the beginning of this session, regret can indeed be associated with a virtuous sovereign mind. When it is present, it must be added. This then makes a total of 23 mental events when regret is present. 22 plus 1. Here, the addition of regret is a particular case. In general, as we just explained, in the desire realm around a virtuous mental event, there are always 22 around a virtuous sovereign mind, there are always 22 mental events. If regret is present, we add it, and that makes 23. That concludes this part concerning the mental events around a virtuous sovereign mind. We come to the second subpart, mental events around a non-virtuous sovereign mind. This is the second case. Once again, in the desire realm, and in this case, a non-virtuous sovereign mind. The root text explains this in stanza 29, lines 2, 3, and 4, and stanza 30, line 1. The root text says, around a non-virtuous sovereign mind, when this last is associated with dissociated ignorance, or one of the last three views, 20 mental events appear. When it is associated with the 4 afflictive obscurations, aggressiveness, etc., or with regret, 21 mental events appear. Now we will explain each of the points evoked in the root text. To understand what we are talking about when we talk about the last 3 views, as the root text says, around a non-virtuous sovereign mind, when this last is associated with dissociated ignorance, or the last 3 views. In this case, it's important to remember what we went over last session. In the desire realm, all of the afflictive obscurations are not necessarily non-virtuous. There are 3 afflictive obscurations that are undefined. Neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. We'll list them concerning these 3 undefined afflictive obscurations. We find the first 2 views. The first is the view of a whole in destruction. The second is a view that grasps extremes. Those 2 views are undefined. The third undefined mental event is ignorance mixed with these 2 views. These 3 afflictive obscurations are undefined. In the root text, it also speaks about unmixed or dissociated ignorance. It's important to remember that there are 2 types of ignorance. There's mixed ignorance and unmixed ignorance. This unmixed ignorance is ignorance that is not mixed. In other words, it is isolated. In other words, this ignorance is not linked with what? With the other afflictions. It is neither linked with the root afflictive obscurations nor the minor afflictive obscurations. Ignorance is mixed or unmixed with the afflictive obscurations when it is, respectively, associated or dissociated from the 5 other root afflictions, as well as all of the minor afflictive obscurations. Ignorance is mixed or unmixed with the afflictive obscurations when it is, respectively, associated or dissociated from the 5 other root afflictions, as well as all of the other minor afflictions. We can have time for questions after. Oh, just a quick request. Can everyone please put airplane mode on? We were talking about mixed and unmixed ignorance. Here in this stanza, we are talking about unmixed ignorance and the last 3 views. The last 3 views are the last 3 out of the list of 5. If we exclude the 2 that we just discussed, which are undefined, the view of a whole in destruction and view that grasps extremes, the 3 remaining views are what is at hand here. False view, view that grasps a view as supreme, and view that grasps observance and asceticism as supreme. What is being said here is that sovereign mind associated with this unmixed ignorance and with the last 3 views is non-virtuous. Due to this, around this sovereign mind, there will be 20 mental events, which we will list. We find the first group of mental events that accompany all sovereign minds, the great basis of mental events that accompany all sovereign mind, that's 10. As it is a non-virtuous sovereign mind, we find the 2 mental events that accompany all non-virtuous sovereign mind: absence of respect and absence of consideration. There's a bit of clarification. Last session, when non-virtuous sovereign mind was presented, we talked about 2 mental events which were called absence of respect and absence of consideration. The translation has been somewhat updated, so now we talk about absence of esteem rather than absence of respect. And in the great basis of The great basis of mental events surrounding a virtuous sovereign mind will talk about esteem rather than respect. So, concerning this list of mental events around a non-virtuous sovereign mind, we've come to 12. 10 from the first great basis and 2 from the great basis of non-virtuous sovereign minds. Additionally, because we're in the desire realm, it's necessary to add the 2 undetermined mental events of course examination and subtle analysis. This brings us to 14. Due to the fact that around this sovereign mind there is either unmixed ignorance and the views, this sovereign mind is an afflicted sovereign mind. Therefore, it's necessary to add the group of 6 mental events that accompany all afflicted sovereign mind. This then brings us to 20 mental events around this non-virtuous sovereign mind in the desire realm. If we come back to what's said in the root text, stanza 29, line 4, and stanza 30, line 1, when it is associated with the 4 afflictive obscurations, aggressiveness, etc., or with regret, 21 mental events appear around. Here, the 4 afflictions mentioned in the root text are the 4 major root afflictions found in the list of undetermined mental events. Desire, attachment, hatred, aversion, pride, and doubt. That's what these 4 afflictions refer to. Then, when we talk about aggressiveness, etc., this refers to the minor afflictions, that accompany every sovereign mind of minor affliction. Then, as the root text says, there is regret. What the root text says here is that we have a sovereign mind which is associated with 4 afflictions, which can also be associated with minor afflictions, and can also be associated with regret. Around this sovereign mind, in these 3 cases, there are 21 mental events. In general, in the desire realm, regardless of what non-virtuous sovereign mind it is, there are always 20 mental events around it. But when this sovereign mind, this non-virtuous sovereign mind, is associated either with one of the 4 afflictions, with aggressiveness, etc., in other words, the group of minor afflictions that accompany all sovereign mind of minor affliction, or with regret, at this point there are not 20 mental events around it, but 21. So, great suspense. What brings us from 20 to 21? So first we count the 20 that generally appear around a non-virtuous sovereign mind, and the 21st is the mental event itself out of this list. In other words, desire attachment is one of the 4 afflictions. It's associated with a non-virtuous sovereign mind. So, with it, we'll find the 20 previous mental events plus desire attachment itself. That makes 21. We'll conclude today's presentation here, and now we can take time for questions if there are. Please wait for the microphone. Sleep was defined as great fatigue when we experience torpor in Shine. Is this part of it? It said that the 5 sense faculties are enclosed within the mental faculty. So is this at hand? Torpor was explained in the great basis of afflictive sovereign mind, and it was described as heaviness of mind, lack of clarity. Thus, it's not the same thing as sleep here. It's described as a distinct mental event. Does that answer the question? Yes, thank you. So, why are course examination and subtle analysis always present in the desire realm? This will be explained in what follows. In the desire realm, they're always present. We'll see that in the form realm, at certain levels, they disappear. They're not present anymore. But in the desire realm, these 2 are always present. There's no reason why, but that's how it's described. There's a slight nuance concerning their disappearance in particular levels of the form realm. 8th Karmapa added slightly different commentary than what Vasubandhu laid out. And notably, we'll see the function of each of these. Concerning course examination and subtle analysis, I don't understand how they can both be present at the same time. Wasn't that already explained? I can't remember if it was already explained. Just to clarify, your question is, I don't understand how coarse examination and subtle analysis can be present at the same time. We didn't say that they're always present together. Yeah, that was part of my question too. So just to clarify, we just briefly presented the 8 undetermined mental events. We said that we didn't say that they necessarily appear together. In the first 4 great bases, they're always present together. This is not the case for the mental events of the 5th great basis, nor is it the case for the undetermined mental events. However, this doesn't prevent or relate to the case that they're present together. Why does it bug you that they're present together? Because if I have an object, either I am coarsely determining what it is and not analyzing it more closely, I'll be like, oh, it's just a bowl. Or I'll have a more detailed analysis. Oh, it's this color, it's cracked, it's this shape, in a more specific way. And so I had the impression that we were either using one or the other. Well, when you look at a bowl and you're analyzing its characteristics more closely, you haven't forgotten that it's a bowl. So, in that sense, perhaps there's no need to separate them. Maybe I'm mistaken, but it seems that you said that in the desire realm, all afflictive obscurations are not non-virtuous. Is that indeed what you said? Yes, that's what we said. Can you explain with an example how desire could be non-virtuous? Could not be non-virtuous. So the question is, we said that not all afflictive obscurations are non-virtuous in the desire realm. There are 3 exceptions to this, but they are 3 that we specifically stated. Unmixed ignorance, view that... Oh, sorry, not unmixed ignorance. A view of a whole in destruction, and a view that grasps extremes, and ignorance that is mixed with these 2. Those are the 3 mental events that are undetermined. Whereas desire is not among these 3, therefore desire attachment is necessarily non-virtuous. Oh, I see. Okay, so it was a good thing I asked the question to clarify. A question about sleep. For example, when we're meditating and we enter into our thoughts and we're cut off from everything that's external, sensations, sounds, could this be part of what's called sleep here? The definition? Because sometimes we're meditating and we realize, oh man, it's like I wasn't even present to what's around me. So you're describing a state of mind that... is it quite distinct from torpor? Because torpor is a state where things are not clear, but if we consider sleep, it's really retreat of the five sense consciousnesses into the mental consciousness, which is present when we sleep. In your meditation, are you talking about an experience where you fell asleep or something else? It's more like meditation where I'm no longer conscious of my sensations. I'm not aware of what I see or aware of what I feel. I'm just caught up in a story in my head. It could just be distraction. In the mental events of the great basis of sovereign mind, marked by afflictions, we had torpor, and then there is agitation. And agitation is when we're distracted by pleasant objects. They can be pleasant mental objects. It's not necessarily sleep. Okay, clearly I don't understand much today, but you said that all afflictive obscurations are not non-virtuous. This concerns the first two views, the views of a whole and destruction and the view that grasps extremes, and ignorance mixed with these two. Did you say why they're not non-virtuous? And if you didn't, can you? Off the cuff, not much is coming to me. Can you bring the microphone around? In the Abhidharmakosha, there is a presentation of phenomena, and this is a presentation of phenomena which are to be adopted or abandoned depending on whether we wish for liberation or not. This classification of phenomena is according to those that we wish to adopt or not. The way that phenomena are categorized in terms of the view of a self as being undefined or others non-virtuous isn't necessarily an explanation of why. It's simply a presentation of the phenomena, and depending on the Vaibhashika's conclusions, when it's used to try and liberate oneself from suffering, then it's possible. If we wish to know why, then perhaps what we can do is first learn the system, the whole system, rather than asking why bit by bit. By studying the system of the Abhidharmakosha as a whole, then it's easier to see why one given phenomenon is classified in a certain way or in a certain place rather than elsewhere. concerning unmixed ignorance or isolated ignorance. We asked Khelzang Puntso what unmixed ignorance is, and he said that it's simply not knowing. He said, for example, right this second, I don't have any desire attachment present. Therefore, it's not. We could say that what's present for me is not mixed with an afflictive obscuration. However, I'm unable to know how many people there are in the room or how many hairs there are on Pierre's head. We'll dedicate now. Thank you.